Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a coffee chat brought to you by the SA Property Investors Network. And if this is your first time and that you're watching us, you've never heard of us, welcome, welcome, and welcome. As always, we like this to be interactive and we want this to be an informative 30 minutes to an hour that you guys just honor us with your time. So, as always, we're going to be having an amazing guest, and that is a lovely lady by the name of Lisa Hugo from Intergen. She's going to be talking to us about structures and also the tax implications regarding that, but essentially structures on portfolios and how you should be structuring your property portfolios. But as I said, to those of you who it's your first time joining us today, I just want to say welcome. And if you don't know who we are, well, we are the SA Property Investors Network. And what that is a network of like-minded individuals who either want to help you start or grow your property portfolio. So it could be your first ever property, you don't know what you're doing and you really want to learn and you want to start, we can facilitate that. Or you have a bit of a portfolio already, but you actually now want to scale and want to make it bigger. We also can help you facilitate that. But as always, we have a ton of events, and I would like to always start off with the events that we are going to be having, just so everybody understands what it is that we're doing and what we're having. As we know, it is November, so we have quite a few more right before we wrap up for year end. So we have just a few property events that are going to be happening. The first one we're going to be having is tomorrow, and this is the Investor Deal Night that's happening at 6 o'clock. It's an in-person event, and it's for investors such as yourself, people who want to get deals. Either you don't have the time or the capacity to go look for them yourselves, but we are going to be having an Investor Deal Night where we're going to be pitching deals from different aspects. And if they ring true to you, please register because it is invite only. Also, we're going to be having a mastermind that's right at the month end. It's happening on the 30th. This is only for our professional members. So if you are intermediate or foundation members, unfortunately, we would not be able to attend the mastermind, but that's happening at 6 o'clock. You can actually get the register. And all these events and these dates that I'm talking about, the link will be in the chat box. So you can just go into the chat box and actually check out all of these events. The next one is a free event, similar to this, where we always just imparting knowledge, and that's happening quite soon. But also we are going to be having a webinar, and that's happening on Thursday. That's you can register for that, and we're going to be talking about unlocking finance. Right, so there is going to be a webinar on Thursday about unlocking finance, and you can just quickly register for that. And for those of you who are amped and excited about the property show that's happening this coming weekend on Saturday and Sunday, you will find us there at the property show. So we're very excited about that, and we hope to see you guys there. And we're actually running a competition in terms of getting free tickets. I think they're all done. I think they're all grabbed, but we are definitely looking forward to seeing you there. And yes, that is a roundup of our events for this upcoming week. However, as I said, we have a phenomenal lady, and she is going to be joining us, but we have quite a few of you here. We have Kara Lee, she says afternoon. We have Tuma, who is from Bruno Smile Law. She's super excited to hear about today. So please just put all of your questions for Lisa in the chat box. Like I said, we are going to be talking about structures. But without further ado, I would like to welcome the lovely lady herself, and that is Lisa. How are you?
Good, well, technically still morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very happy to be here with you guys today. Hope everyone else is having a wonderful Monday. I'm really excited to answer some of your questions.
Awesome. So if you could just quickly introduce yourself as to what you do. I do know you are from Intergen and you deal primarily with structuring of companies and taxation, but what exactly do you do?
So basically, we assist, any new aspiring property investors just start their journey off correctly, help them inform them which decision to make regarding which structure to set up and when to set that up. Even if it's somebody who's a bit more seasoned in the property sphere, who's been at it for a while, but they feel as though they aren't able to necessarily expand their current property portfolio, we give them some guidance as to that, specifically in the legal and the tax realm. We also provide accounting services, etc. So basically, we're just a bit of support for property investors.
Okay, fantastic. And so we'll just get started with the question. And like I said, if you have any questions for Lisa, please put them in the chat box and we'll always make sure that they get answered. Lisa, as I started working with individuals like, SA Property Network and got exposed to people such as yourself, I understood what happens behind the curtain because there's a general understanding when you are, a normal person, quote unquote, and then when you're an investor. So the first one is people love purchasing property. It's a big deal, right? And then, you understand you do it in your first name and you have that accolade that I have a property, right? I have a property. However, as an investor, we're often advised that that might not particularly be the best way to do it. So I always want to ask, especially if you're purchasing your first home as an investment property, would you suggest that somebody do it in their personal name or in a company?
So there are a variety of factors to consider. Obviously, having a company, especially now with South Africa being grey listed, etc., there are additional level of requirements and just sort of responsibilities when it comes to owning a company that some people need to take into consideration now, because it is very easy to just register a company and then go ahead and get your first property, which is all fine and well. But it is also disingenuous not to mention the fact that you do have to make sure that you do your annual returns, that you do your tax returns, that you keep your books in order, etc., because of how strict SARS is, especially now, requesting beneficial ownership, disclosure, and things like that. So there, you have to also be cognizant of the fact that there does an additional level of responsibility does come along with registering a company, as well as the benefits that you receive. So it is really a toss up. And it also depends on what your goals are. And if you are convinced that you will actually be going really hard in your property investment journey, and it's not going to be sort of a one off where you might just have one property, you rent it out, and that's about it. If you are planning to expand your portfolio and actually work on that portfolio, it is advisable to register a company. It would be a lot more cost effective in the long run to just start off your property investment with the structure in place. You won't have to worry about transferring any of those properties later on, which might cost a lot more, especially as the value of the property appreciates. And obviously, there's a little bit more wiggle room and a lot more flexibility when it comes to an entity such as a company, just playing around with directorship, using it as a joint venture, having a partner, etc. So there are certain things you can do within a company that you're not necessarily able to do in your personal capacity, but it is also something to note that registering a company does not necessarily mean, for example, approaching financing institutions that you'll be granted that finance, because when it is a brand new company, they do look at the affordability of the director. So if your personal affordability isn't the greatest and you register a company and then you find yourself in a position where you aren't even able to access the finance, and that's why you register that company. So just doing a lot more research before you start the property investment journey, knowing exactly what your plan is, obviously working with your coach at SAPIN, engaging in the network to know if this is something that you're actually committed to. If so, then definitely start it off on the right foot, purchase it in a company name. But if it's something that you're not entirely ready for, the commitment, just managing a company correctly and trying to avoid any conflict with SARS, then it is definitely just something to consider. If this is what you want, then definitely a company. If you're not 100% sure and you might not mind paying transfer duty to move that property a bit later on in your journey, then you can do it in your personal name. But there is definitely a variety of things to consider, and you should definitely engage with somebody who actually knows what they're doing, somebody who's been through the venture before, and just get their advice and try to really rationalize what would be the best for you, because there isn't always a one size fits all remedy to everything.
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. I think what is important there is to understand the pros and cons of each one. Like you mentioned, doing company structure, if you plan on having like a substantial portfolio, usually helps when you do it out the gate. But now, if you are going to be trickling them in, the admin that's necessary for the upkeep of a property sometimes could be tedious for some people. So it depends on what it is. But that also now piggybacks off of the next question that we had, and that is, can you actually change your portfolio later? Let's say I'm now on like my third or fourth property. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of doing a good job here. I have an established portfolio. I'm thinking I should probably move these out of my personal name, right? Maybe even like I have a financial cap now. As an individual entity, the banks won't loan me because I have a cap. Can I actually then go, okay, I want to now shift everything, or is it a matter of, if it's done, it's done?
So you are able to change your structure or even just implement a structure a bit later on in your journey. As mentioned, there would be cost implications. Just transferring those properties into the entity, setting up the structure a bit later on might cost a bit more, depending on how long you wait and obviously as the price of things change. There are a variety of ways in order to transfer the property, so it doesn't necessarily always have to be an outright sale. And also something that clients tend to struggle to wrap their heads around is like when they register a company and they are the director and the shareholder of this company, but they're also the owner of the property, they tend to forget that in order to use the benefits of an entity, get a trust with a company, you have to see yourself and the entity as separate entities. Because obviously some people are like, this is my property. Why would I pay myself X amount for X property? Forgetting things like capital gains, transfer duty, all that great stuff. And so it's important to note that SARS wants people to understand, like, okay, but you have to treat these as two separate things. You cannot be wearing the same hat. You actually have to have the paperwork in place in order for this transaction to actually occur, whether that be a loan account agreement between yourself and the company, be it also yourself, just to kind of show the exchange of assets between yourself and the company, whether it be a Section 42 transfer, which is a shares for asset transfer, where essentially a new company is registered and you acquire shares in that company in exchange for giving that property to that company. There are a variety of ways to consider that transfer. Obviously, you would sit down with one of us and we'd obviously give you the best advice on how to go about that, because you won't always necessarily have the capital at hand to sort of pay yourself for that property. Because what you want to avoid is trying to just sort of move assets around and think it doesn't really matter because you're the director, you're the shareholder, you're the original owner, etc. And another thing to also consider is the property bonded or not? Because obviously you would then have to do a bond cancellation and refinancing within the asset, so in the entity. So it is possible to transfer bonded assets as well. So the short answer is definitely yes. You are able to change your structure or implement the structure significantly later on. However, there are a variety of factors to consider, a bit more admin, cost implications, etc. So once again, it is really important to be very deliberate when you start your property investment journey, to get the guidance, ask the questions right in the beginning, learn from the mistakes of other individuals who have gone before you, and then obviously start off on the best foot, because you can very quickly find yourself in a position where you have a number of properties, 40 plus. We have had clients like that, and then they've reached their financial cap, they want to grow, they want to expand, they want to move things around, but just looking at the cost implications of actually doing that, it's very discouraging, and oftentimes they kind of feel stuck, and now there's no real way around it. Otherwise they have to spend the money or sell the assets off and start from scratch.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. That's actually, quite an interesting thought train there. Because we're already getting questions from the viewers, and that's fantastic. This one is from Samke, and he says, "Good afternoon, everyone. Lisa, when would you say is the best time to sell?" I think this is actually quite a good question.
So especially in situations where our clients have family members, have dependents, and they're also interested in the aspect of legacy planning and estate planning, we do obviously recommend setting up the trust as soon as possible, in conjunction with the other entities that you set up, purely because, for example, if you do have your entities, such as the companies, and you have assets within those companies, etc., when you want to transfer those shares into the trust, into a holding company, it can attract CGT implications and transfer duties, because the value of the shares will be impacted by the value of the assets held by that entity. So once you then transfer the shares of an entity that holds, for example, properties worth 15 million, etc., the shares then accumulate that value. So in order to avoid that entire process and it being a lot more costly, what you want to do is set that structure up very early on. And then you already have, for example, your trust in your entity, or your trust and a holding entity with subsidiary entities, etc. Just to get that done really early on, just to become a bit more comfortable with what you need to do, like the admin regarding trust maintenance, company maintenance, etc. And then obviously you're also able to play around a bit with your legacy planning and your estate planning, making the trust the beneficiary of certain life policies, making sure that your will has your trust in it as well to leave, for example, any free residue upon your passing. And it's also just important to note that, for example, with the trust, you are able to um, provide for your children who might be minors, because should you pass away, God forbid, your minor children aren't really able to inherit anything. That will all just go to the guardians fund, and we know how that goes when the master is sort of involved with that. So when you're able to really just play around with that and have it in place early on, it's a lot less costly further on down the line. There's a lot less running back and forth trying to solve your structure a bit later on. You kind of have a very clear vision or a map as to what you want to do and how you want to do it. For example, if you already set up your trust, you have a holding company, you are able to register any subsidiary companies very easily and just slot them into your existing portfolio, your existing structure, without having to worry too much about sort of having to take a few steps back because you have this company, but now you have to move things around. You have to register a trust here, and then obviously just dealing with all the cost implications of that. But once again, it really depends if that is sort of the best for you. If you don't necessarily have a family or anything that you prioritize in terms of people that you want to benefit from it, or you do not see the value in a trust for you specifically, then maybe you don't necessarily need to register a trust. So once again, each person has sort of their own needs and requirements, what would best suit them. And that's why we are available, obviously, to have consultations and advise you based on specifically what your journey looks like and what your needs are.
Yeah, and that just sparked a new question now, that I think quite a few viewers want to know, and that is a matter of: is there an order in which you like need to go through, or can you immediately just go to one certain structure? Like, for example, my first, can that immediately go into a trust? So I set up a trust and it immediately goes into there, or do I have to do it into a company and then sell them? Is there like an order that which things go?
Sorry, Kelly, the network is kind of bad. I did miss a large portion of your question.
Oh, pardon. I was saying, is there an order in which you need to actually action something? Can my first property automatically go into a trust, or do I need to then set up a company, or is it straight to a trust, or is there an order, like a particular set of order in which you establish a trust?
So there's not necessarily an order as mentioned. Each individual's needs look a bit different. You are 100% able to just register trust and have a property put directly in the trust. But what you do need to consider, obviously, is the admin and then, for example, the tax implications. A trust is taxed at 45%. You obviously can make use of the conduit principle. So the conduit principle essentially will ensure that if you distribute any benefits that come into the trust in the same financial year that they are received, you can distribute that to the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries will be taxed at their tax rate rather than the tax rate of the trust, which is at 45%. So this is ideal in situations where the beneficiaries are, for example, minor children, very old retired persons, someone who's 18 or just freshly employed in a very low tax bracket. But if you find yourself personally in the 45% tax bracket, you have no other dependents, basically you would be the only beneficiary, and you would also be sort of the only individual in the entire structure. You don't have any dependents, whatever, and you find yourself in a position where you are trading within the trust. The trust is taxed at 45%. In order to mitigate that and use the conduit principle, you'd have to distribute a benefit out to yourself, but then you'd also tax at 45% at your own personal rate. So when you look at a situation like that, you might find that maybe a trust isn't ideal and you could just use a company, be taxed at 27%, pay yourself out dividends if you are the direct shareholder rather than a trust. So it is all about looking at sort of the different levels you're able to operate at, be it your personal capacity, trust capacity, and a company capacity, and see where the tax rate is more favorable, and also how you would like to move around the finances, whether you're going to be paying out dividends every year to the shareholders, be it an individual, be it a trust, whether you're going to do shareholders loans from a trust to a company or from a holding company to subsidiaries. Obviously, seeing how you play around with the finance in that aspect. So the way your structure can look is very unique. Obviously, once again, depending on what your needs are, what your current home life looks like, what your current family structure looks like, etc. So you are able to use a trust directly to trade. But once again, there are a number of things that you need to consider. You are able to have a trust with only one company underneath that company, use that company purely for trade purposes, or you are able to implement the structure, be it a trust, the holding company subsidiaries, or just have a holding company with subsidiary companies beneath that you use to trade. And that obviously comes in with the importance of asset protection, where you make sure that you group together assets of similar risk portfolios under similar entities, because you don't want to expose properties that are very low in risk to those that are very high in risk. So that's also obviously where you play around with using a number of entities, but never too many. As mentioned earlier, there's a lot. It's a very tedious thing to keep up to date with all the requirements for a company to be compliant. So it's really about being very deliberate in your investments, knowing what you're getting into, knowing the risk profiles of your properties, and knowing what you want your structure to look like at the end of the day.
Okay. And as we're coming onto a close, just have like another question here from our guests, and they're saying, speaking about having subsidiary companies, if they fail, do they have if they fall, do they have an effect on the holding company, or can you easily cut them off?
So it is a lot easier to cut off because the holding company would just be a shareholder. So they're not necessarily responsible for the subsidiary company. So in terms of failing, if you mean it's a situation where you get into sort of issues with your creditors, etc., if the creditors can prove that there's been any reckless trading or actions done by the director, then they are able to sort of what they call pierce the corporate veil, where they are able to remove the legal separation between the entities. So, for example, if this specific subsidiary company A does something very reckless and the creditors want their money back, but obviously the entity itself does not have any money, if they're able to prove upon investigation that no, this director traded very recklessly, knowing exactly what they were doing, and they find that the directors of those entities are the same, they are able to then go to the holding company, and you aren't necessarily able to cut off that subsidiary. There will be accountability at a different company level, be it the holding company. So it really depends on what failing is, so to speak. If it's a situation where it's just your company, your properties aren't generating much income, you're just operating at a loss, but you're not necessarily running into severe credit issues or implications with SARS, you should be fine. You are able to either just deregister the company, etc. So you are able to quote unquote cut it off. But if you're actually running into any sort of legal issues, it's not that easy to cut off because they are very thorough with the investigations. And obviously, now with the disclosure of beneficial ownership, everybody is allowed to sort of have an overview of what your structure does look like, because you do have to disclose who is the shareholder of the subsidiary, who is the shareholder of the holding company, who are the beneficiaries, or who is the shareholder of that holding company. So they are able to see what your entire portfolio looks like. Obviously, this is in the best interest for SARS, but also for any potential creditors, just to sort of know what they're getting involved with. So it is important to be very careful and to stay as honest and be as smart as you are as you can in trading, just to avoid any issues. But you are able to still benefit from that legal separation between your entities should you be trading correctly and not making any reckless decisions.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Lisa. I know I've learned quite a substantial amount of things in terms of how it's probably beneficial to just start out in the correct structure instead feel the pinch of the cost of moving things across. So I always say thank you very much for that. And thank you to Intergen for giving us all of this knowledge. If you do want to speak to Lisa regarding structures and you think maybe this is time for me to restructure my portfolio or establish trust, we can definitely put you in contact with Lisa. And that's the support at SA Property Network. But outside of that, thank you so much, Lisa, for joining.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you. And guys, before we wrap up, I would just like to do another quick run through of the events that we're going to be having as that we are going to be having coaching and legal webinar, but then also we're going to be having the invest right here at the head office in Edenville. That you can honestly get it on our website. The link is in the chat box, and then it is invite only. Also, we're going to be having a mastermind, and that's only available to the professional members, and that's happening on the 30th of November at 6 o'clock. And lastly, we're going to be having a webinar that's happening on the 16th of November, and you can also register for that. And we're going to be discussing unlocking finance. How do you unlock as an investor in order for you to grow your portfolio? And as always, please, I am looking forward to seeing you guys bigger, better, and absolutely more fantastic next year. But I want to say thank you so much. See you at the property show this coming Saturday and Sunday.